I would not have thought Dutch.
Yeah, most of it, most people think it's like Asian or South Pacific, and that's because the Dutch controlled such a long portion of that. So there's a lot of different variations of it, different
That
spellings,
is
different.
interesting. That is exactly what I thought. I mean, I didn't think you were from that area. I looked at your Instagram account, but like the last name though, that just when I first saw it, that's exactly what I was thinking. And that makes total sense though, now that you say it.
Well, that was unintentionally a good intro. So I'm Preston Stewart and Sayre Payne. We're joined by Joshu Mooi. I get it?
Got it. Yep.
And Josh was just talking about what Mooi means.
Means, right. Yeah, it's the Dutch word for beautiful or attractive or whatever it was. And we're not even really sure at this point if that's our original last name.
Really?
So, the first people with that name came to the US in like the late 1800s. So a lot of times back then they would Americanize or Anglicize, some of the more traditional ethnic names. So so we're not even sure. If you look at it, there's still some people that live kind of where we're from that still do have that name. So it's possible that it is, but it's one of those things where it's a word in the language. So it could have been a nickname at some point and then it just stayed.
So Josh and I connected online because somebody sent me a note and said you should do a video or talk about this guy, Joshu Mooi, and some of what he did while he was a Marine. And now hearing what your last name means, did your buddies in the Marines know that? Because I feel like that sets up some awesome nicknames.
No, we actually never talked about it at all. And everybody always says it wrong, right? So everybody always says they just assume it's Mooey because you got the MOO and then throw a vowel on the end.
Yeah.
Growing up, it was like they would just add letters to it. Like teachers and all that would add letters. So it'd be like Mooney or Muji. Actually, in boot camp, I think I was Muji for the whole time. So like the kill hat and all that were just Muji. They would just throw a J in there for whatever. And nobody ever really asked what it meant, or they just assumed that was the name and
just rolled with it.
Yep.
I just read, and this might be fake news too, by the way. It was one of those Facebook memes, but apparently, and this might be one of those Mr. Rogers Marine Sniper urban myths, but apparently the voice of Bambi was a 3-tour Vietnam Marine. And like he was a drill instructor and all this stuff, and nobody knew. He never told anyone. And I haven't checked it, but I literally just read it the other day. He's this total badass. But when he was like 6 or whatever, he was the baby Bambi voice with that high-pitched voice, and later became a Marine and total badass. Be funny to see if that's true or not.
Good luck digging that one out.
Yeah, I wonder.
But he didn't want to be made fun of. But I think he should have been called Bambi if he was that much of a badass. I think that would have been cool. That's the whole point of it.
Josh, you're not in the Marines anymore. What are you doing these days? Where you living?
Correct. So I got off active duty in 2008 and moved back to Illinois. Was living in the west suburbs of Chicago for a while, and like 2013, I got hired with the state. I'm actually a game warden in Illinois.
Oh, cool.
So I've been doing that for September was 8 years. And
that's cool.
In 19, I got promoted. I'm a supervisor now, so I'm in charge of like 10 other guys, and we cover Cook and DuPage County, which are the 2 most populated counties in the state, and then essentially almost all of Illinois' portion of Lake Michigan. So during the summer, we're on the boat a lot. During the fall and winter, we do some hunting stuff, and pretty much all year round, we're doing fish stuff.
I'm from Champaign. Like all my family's in Champaign, and we have some family land down south, close to St. Louis. And my wife and I lived in Naperville for a little while. So we've done the full length of Illinois. But when I think of DNR, I don't think of Chicago. I think of farmland in the South.
Yep. And actually, I lived in Naperville for a little. That's where I moved back to. Was back to Naperville, and I was living in Wheaton and Warrenville. Now I live down in the south suburbs. We moved once we had the kids. We actually closed on this house the day that we went into labor. Like closed that morning. She went into labor that night.
Why not?
Yeah, just do everything at once. But that's one of our issues up here, as far as DNR is most people don't even know who we are. When we run into them up here, it's city people. They don't, unless they have a boat or they fish or they maybe hunt somewhere else in Illinois, half the people we come into contact with don't even know who we are, what we do. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
When you join them, I know a lot of folks go from military to law enforcement of some degree. Was that part of your plan when you joined the Marines?
No, originally I didn't have a plan, right? Coming out of high school, I didn't really have a plan. I knew that I wanted to go into the Marines, and I had an older brother who had, went into boot camp and ended up getting injured a couple of times, got recycled a couple of times, and then finally got processed out. So I was going to do that, and went.
What year are we talking, Josh?
So I went in 2004, and he's probably every bit of 9 years older than me. So
okay,
had to be mid 90s, I think, is when he would have went to San Diego.
I'm just wondering where 9/11 fits in with all this, right?
Yeah, so I was in high school still when 9/11 happened. I think I was either a sophomore or a junior. I think a sophomore.
Mm-hmm.
So we're about the same age. I was a sophomore.
We're the same age. I was sophomore. I was 04 high school.
Yeah, 04. And I mean, I'm probably one of the few people in the world that I cannot tell you exactly what I was doing or where I was at when I found out that, when we found out about 9/11 happening. I'm assuming I was at school. I don't really remember.
That's funny.
There's a lot going on there.
It was a weekday, so yeah, probably school.
Yeah. But it was. I mean, I know people who are like, they were sitting in history class and they rolled in like TVs into the classroom. Like, they didn't do that for us. So I don't know. Maybe it was just my school. But
okay.
I think that has something to do with where you were, though. Like, I was going to school in Indiana, and they said the World Trade Centers have been a plane flew, however they phrased it, and I didn't know what the World Trade Center was. I was 15. I feel like I was relatively smart and worldly for a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have told you where they were, what they looked like. A Midwest kid, I guess,
I'm same way. I didn't know what it was, but they did wield they played it on we had school TVs in the corner up in the building, and it would and they played it, but on like a 2-hour delay. But we didn't know we knew it was on a 2-hour delay, but like I remember seeing the second plane hit on the live stream, but it was like 2 hours after the fact. But we didn't know that the second plane was going to hit though when we were watching it. So it was like it felt like it was instant or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm sure that had, obviously that had some play into, okay, now I'm going to do that for sure. But it always been, a family in the military, and that had always been an option and kind of always been like a thing that I had wanted to do. And then if you're going to do it, you might as well do the hardest one, right? Join the Marine Corps.
Infantry?
I was infantry. Yeah.
Yeah. So double down there, huh?
Hardcore.
Sayre's
if you're gonna do it, go all the way.
Yeah, hardcore.
Yeah, and
I think it's badass. Marines are badass, man.
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, yeah, it's but yeah, no. So you felt even in the 90s, the Dragon Sword commercials, those are awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. They had some of the best marketing.
Yeah. And honestly, even though Army was at least saying be all you can be, I still agree with that. That's a great motto. That other crap with like playing pool with your dad in a cornfield, recruiting video bullshit, I did not like, because Marines at the same time were slaying freaking fire dragons.
And then transforming into dress blues.
Yeah, and it's all
on a mountaintop.
Slick.
Yeah.
Yep.
Totally slick.
And I think one of the biggest problems that the Army had with their marketing was when they switched their motto from "Be all you can be" to an army of one, and that like totally destroys the idea of the teamwork mindset, and like it gets a lot of people thinking like I can do great things instead of we can do great things, and now they've shifted from that again. Anyways,
Army Strong is what it was, because I don't know if it's still that, but I know it turned into Army Strong. Maybe I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is.
I miss Be All You Can Be. It's like you can't go wrong with that. And if you do that, it's gonna push yourself. I get what you're talking about with the team though. That's real interesting thought. That's why you guys are the core though, right? It is really probably in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, it really hasn't. The marketing, the ads, the commercials and stuff have changed, but the idea and the history and tradition like behind the Marine Corps hasn't changed at all. For as long as I can
Mhm.
remember, it's been the few, the proud, and it's never strayed from that.
Right.
It's, they whether you want to call it propaganda or indoctrination or whatever you want to call it. I mean, in boot camp, it's a lot of Marine Corps history. It's a lot of stuff that we used to do, and this is the legacy you have to live up to. And I think
Mhm.
that really goes a long way in affecting the psychology, especially of 18, 19-year-old kids that are coming out of high school and looking for something to do. And I'm sure it's the same, with kids coming out of college and going into the officers corps. But that really shows you, like, hey, if you're going to do this, you need to go all in, and this is who came before you. So you need to try to be that or better. And I think that really
Mhm.
does change a lot of people's, mind and kind of get them into that mindset. And it's really interesting to see. I'm sure you guys have noticed it too. Is like, it's really interesting to see like who I was before boot camp, and then like who I was after boot camp, and
Mhm.
now like who I am now. Because I didn't know who I was back then. And when I got
Kid.
out of boot camp, I knew I was like, hey, I'm a Marine now. This is what I get to do. This is what this is what I have to do. And like now, as an adult and a father and a supervisor and all these things that I am now, looking at all the stuff that I learned and how that really affects the way that I interact with the world and people. And I think it's like I don't even know who I was in high school or who I was coming out of high school. It's crazy.
Young. There's a
That
lot going on at that age.
that time period, 04, 03, 04, 05, I remember, and it's I don't know, maybe funny is not the right way to put it, but looking back now, it's kind of sounds silly, but I remember the feeling. I was on track to go to West Point, so I knew I had 4 more years before I was going to get out there and do the real stuff. And I had people, myself included, that thought these wars were going to be over. Like guys were saying, I got to drop out and enlist because I'm gonna miss this, essentially, which I know sounds weird to some people. Will hear that and go, "What on earth is
Yeah,
that?"
no,
But
I get it.
did
Yeah.
you experience any of that? Did you have that in your mind? Like, we got to go. This Iraq or Afghanistan thing could be over any day.
Well, and I think, not to like toot my own horn here. Like I was the quintessential like high school kid who teachers always said like had great potential, but I was just lazy. And I was a decently smart kid. I had good grades all the way up like to high school, and then I kind of started falling off in high school. And I think a lot of that was the social aspect, and you
Mhm.
trying to fit in, trying not to be like the teacher's pet, that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
did pretty well in the ASVAB. As far as Marines are concerned, I could have done any MOS. And I think the reason that I chose infantry was because this is happening now. I want to go do that now. And then maybe I'll change it, in the future. I'll go do something else, And so I think that that had some part to play in me deciding on infantry rather than like going to be a helicopter mechanic or avionics or something where I was able to, I guess, show that I had the educational or intelligence capacity to do it. But again, I mean, I was easy route. Let's go be a ground pounder and, see what happens. So
I like that you called that the easy route.
well,
I don't know about
it's,
that.
it
I know what you
takes
mean.
the
Yeah.
least amount of cognitive ability, I guess.
Did you know in
Well,
boot camp?
I was surprised. Well, on that note, I agree with you. That's how my mentality was. We're the same age, and we just took different paths, but very similar ones. And to me, yeah, I don't want to knock any of the other ones. It's a team sport. We were talking about that, but to me, the one job, if I was thinking army or military, I'm thinking guns and bullets and like barbed wire and mud and shit and crawling in trenches and shooting. And to me, it was just that was infantry, and that's all what I wanted to do. Um, and I just wanted to figure out that path of um, going in that direction. And but with the Marines, isn't it true? Were you able to get infantry? Don't you have? I thought that that's something you guys branch after basic or something, because I don't know if I fully understand the enlisted
Yeah.
side of Marines.
So there's some jobs that you can enlist into going into boot camp. And then a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them are, you can go in no contract and then they just show you, like, stick you wherever they need you. So initially what most guys will do is the recruiters slot you for whatever, they have their quotas, how
Mm-hmm.
many they need for each position. And most guys that go infantry will just get slotted for an 03. They'll go to boot camp. You go through boot camp, you get out of boot camp, and then we go to School of Infantry. Now, once you get to School of Infantry and I don't know if it's different now, I assume it's probably still the same, but once you get to School of Infantry, everybody's just an 03. So everybody's infantry. If you want to, there's like, I forget what week it is, but you go through like half of School of Infantry or something. If I remember correctly, it's like almost half of School of Infantry where everybody's just an 03 and you're learning all basic infantry stuff. And then they brought us out onto the, I don't know if your barracks were set up the same way, but ours were like big H's. The buildings was a big H. So the courtyard on each side. And they'd bring you out to that courtyard, and not necessarily a parade deck, but just a big courtyard. So they bring everybody out to the courtyard. It's like after sundown, you know, we're all sitting in a thing. They have a couple of the School of Infantry instructors like go to a different part in the courtyard. The one lead instructor explains to you who is for which part of infantry, right? So you got machine gunners, riflemen, you know, small gunners, mortarmen, right? And each person is an MOS. And then they just say go. And like if you want to go be a machine gunner, you got to get up and go over there because they're only taking because they're only taking 25 guys, you know, to be machine gunners or 15 guys to be mortarmen. So like they just, you know, everybody gets up and scrambles to where they want to go. And you know, for riflemen, you want to be an infantry rifleman, you just stay exactly where you're sitting. And I mean, it was guys were jumping up and like everywhere. So that's how they split us in School of Infantry to go pick the MOS that you wanted to be inside of the infantry, you know, umbrella.
Which is the one that people didn't want, where like they got to like force people into that slot?
So it was kind of a toss up. Like most guys didn't want to be riflemen, right? Because that's like everybody jumps up from that. But I think the most like wanted position was actually machine gunners, like at least in my you know class. Tons of guys went to machine gunners, got turned away, right, and had to go be like assaultmen, right? They rocket assaultmen, so small launchers, that stuff. Yeah. And those guys ended up, that's probably the best job they could have got, because some of those guys ended up not being you know, regular like on foot assaultmen. They ended up going to a cat platoon, right, an anti-armor platoon, and riding in Humvees all day shooting tow launchers. So I think Mortarman was like a pretty good one, but you know, it didn't really seem like there was one that people were avoiding, at least in my class.
There's something about that I love, where it's just like, go pick your job and people scattered. I like that.
Yeah.
They were getting, this is at the phase 2 of basic, what you're talking about, the advanced training.
Yeah. So we do our 13-week boot camp, and then it's essentially still on, you know, you go to Camp Pendleton and then you go to the School of Infantry, or on the same portion where School of Infantry is, there's like MCT, which is Marine Combat Training. So anybody that's not going to be infantry goes to MCT, but it's all in the same little area.
I see. And then so you're getting trained up there, when you're showing up to your actual Marine unit, you're supposed to be slotted as a machine gunner when you get there, or as a rifleman when you get there.
Yeah. So when you go through SOI, you finish SOI. So the first half is all basic stuff. When you finish and graduate from School of Infantry, you're actually graduating with that MOS of 0311 or 0351 or 31 for machine gunners, you know, 41 for mortarmen. So you actually graduate School of Infantry with that MOS, and then, you know, before graduation, they'll slot, you know, how many they have for machine gunners, how many they have of riflemen, and then they'll, you know, pick out the units, tell you what unit you're going to. So then that unit they need 15 machine gunners, they'll get 15 machine gunners. We had a lot of guys from my unit actually for my School of Infantry actually end up going to like 29 Palms, and I think some guys even made it all the way back over to the East Coast. My unit was half a mile away on Camp Pendleton, so like they just put us on a bus at the end of the day and just drove us over there.
Not bad.
That is not how the Army works. That's interesting. I mean, the Army, The mortars are different. That's a different MOS. But everybody else just straight up infantry. And that's up to the platoon to determine, we're going to put this guy in the machine, this gun team. We're going to make this guy this automatic, the saw. We'll give him the saw. This guy's going to have the grenadier, he's going to be grenadier. And then whatever. And then someone becomes a team leader or something. It's all pick and choose,
So that's how it is for basic, like 0311s, right? So infantry riflemen, like I was. And some of that's actually changing now with the new commandant's, force readiness plan going forward into, with Asia and South Pacific and stuff.
Yeah.
But how it was is, so anybody that was an 11 would go to, you'd end up going to your unit. And then when you get to your unit, same thing. So all riflemen, right? All 0311s, one of you gets stuck with the saw, which usually is the smallest guy.
Yeah.
And then somebody, at the time, the way that the infantry stuff was set up, it was obviously, by the book. The team leader was supposed to have the grenadier, right? He's supposed to have the M203. Well, they didn't want to carry that. So somebody ends up with the M203 on their rifle. And so I was actually a grenadier for my, the entire first deployment. And then team leader just had a rifle. And then we had the assistant saw gunner, right? The assistant machine gunner, which was just another rifle. But the separate MOS of, machine gunners, mortarmen, assaultmen, they would actually go to a line. So just to kind of help clarify this a little bit. So Marine Corps infantry battalions are set up into around 5 companies. So we have a headquarters company, right? Headquarters service company. Then we have 3 line companies. So all infantry. So, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, whatever it was. And then we would actually have another company that is just a weapons company. So weapons company is, mortar, machine guns, cat, assaultmen, all those are in weapons company, but then the machine gunners are assigned to Fox company, or, some they're essentially part of weapons company, and then they get assigned to the line companies as weapons platoons. So Fox company, right? I was in Fox company. We would have a squad of machine gunners, a squad of assaultmen, a squad of mortars, and those guys would be part of our line company. And then guys that were like the 81 millimeters, the bigger manpower portable mortars, those guys would be in weapons company, and they would stay in weapons company. Cat platoon would be weapons company. And
60s were company asset, 60 millimeter mortar.
Yeah. So those were in the line companies.
Yeah.
Those guys were assigned to the essentially the rifle companies, but 81s and those are all weapons company. But so then you'd have assaultmen that are in weapons company instead of the line company. And
so when you drove 30 minutes down the road to your new unit, did you know once you got there, you guys were heading out the door, deploying pretty soon?
Not when we first got there. So I think we graduated SOI like February, which in California doesn't matter because it's still sunny.
February 05.
And then we deployed in July.
That's pretty quick.
So we didn't know that the workup, that they were already they had already started the workup.
Okay.
So we got there. I think we had like a week to get processing and all that done. Get in there, get our stuff, get your rooms, right? You had a couple of days to really do that. And then we were right back into going to the range, doing the company marches and getting ready for that deployment, which was in 4 or 5 months.
Had that unit deployed already? Did you have combat veterans in the ranks, or is this going to be the first go?
Yeah, no, they were actually in the 2nd Battle of Fallujah in 04.
Okay.
And they had taken some pretty good casualties, during that deployment. So some of those guys were still there. We had a lot of guys that deployed with me had deployed on their first, so my first deployment was their second deployment to Iraq. So a lot of those guys were boots when they got to the unit in 03 or 04, deployed, into Iraq in 04, and then came back, had a 6 months off, and within that year they deployed again.
There's got to be some value in that, having guys. I mean, Fallujah was crazy. Second Battle of Fallujah was crazy. There's got to be some value in having, at that point, squad leaders maybe that had been involved. Probably squad leaders, platoon sergeants had been involved in that fight and could actually bring realistic lessons learned, because the fight didn't change that much between Second Fallujah and when you got to Iraq, right?
Right. Yeah, it was, I mean, essentially it was the same. You know, we were still dealing with the same problems. So there was a lot of stuff that they learned that we were able to do pretty quickly and counter pretty well. A lot of the tactics were still the same. A lot of the ROEs changed a little bit, you know, as they do. They're constantly changing, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. And a lot of these guys, like I said, I mean, it's within a year they had deployed back to almost the same area. So we were able to use the knowledge, you know, the area, the people. I think we had some interpreters and some attachments from like the Iraqi army and stuff that were still the same.
Oh,
so that was kind of nice. Not at the platoon level, but at the battalion level, there was some maintenance or maintaining of like the same communication channels, and you knew some of the players, and that I think that helped a lot too.
I was talking to somebody recently who mentioned an army peacekeeping mission to Iraq at some point shortly after the invasion. I guess certain units had been tagged to do peacekeeping, because that, you know, in the great big master plan, like that was it, right? The Iraqi army falls, US takes over, and the next step is peacekeeping. So they showed up in Iraq with like soft skin Humvees in like 04 or something, because that's what their train up was. But it's kind of an interesting conflict, Iraq, because the intensity kind of spiked, dropped, and then spiked again real quickly. And that time frame you're talking about, 04, 05, 06, all the way through 07 was, especially in the West where the Marines spent a lot of time in Anbar, that was no joke.
There were no good stories coming out at that time. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah, that's what I remember.
And it's funny that you mentioned like the soft skin Humvees, like the highbacks and stuff, because that's exactly what we deployed with. That's what we brought with us.
Really?
Because we didn't have any up armors. We got there, we had to do, our first convoy was 36 hours to get over to our AO, from where we landed in, to get to the AO that we were going to be working over on the, in Anbar. And part of that was some guys split off to go to TQ to get up armored Humvees because we didn't have any. So they had to go to, was it Takatam, I think is how you say it. So they had to go up there, get a bunch of Humvees. We stole some Humvees from the army. And then, dropped our highbacks and stuff off and grabbed these up armored Humvees and took those on with us. And then when we were done, we dropped it back off and put our stuff back on the plane and left.
Jesus.
Interesting.
It's crazy to think about that. Yeah.
I think part of the reason that our deployment was set up that way, or that we had brought things that way, is because we were not initially tasked as a unit to go into Iraq, right? We were on a Westpac. I was on a MU. We went to, Egypt. We did Operation Bright Star in Egypt. We did some training in Australia. We went to Greece. We went to all these places, and then all of a sudden we get a call that says, hey, this unit's doing this thing. They need you guys to come and, you're going to be a reserve force. And then we went and didn't have quite the right equipment to do it. So we had to, when we got there, we had to grab whatever we could as far as the up armors and that. And it's kind of hard to fit all those on a small ship. So
you guys were, you were supposed to be a reserve force when you got there?
So we were the, I don't know if reserve force is the correct term, but so 3-6, who is the East Coast unit, the sister unit that we worked with during like Operation Steel Curtain, it was their operation.
Mm-hmm.
So we were just there as a, assisting unit. We were assigned to 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force at the time, and, got assigned under them, even though we were a 1st Marine Division unit, like that's who was in charge. That's who we got assigned under. And so we worked with them and ended up about halfway through the Steel Curtain stuff when 3-6 kind of solidified their position on the north side of the river there. We then stopped being an assisting force and became like a main effort. So it was like really weird transition there. But yeah, originally we were we were only supposed to be there to help them. And I think in total, we may have only been in country something like 72 or 75 days.
You only were in
Really?
country 75 days?
I think so.
No
I
kidding.
think we
Wow.
were from October, I want to say it's early October of 2005 to right after Christmas. And like right after Christmas, we got back on ship and we left again.
Holy
So I
cow.
remember doing Christmas at I think it was Camp Ripper, on Al Saad there.
Isn't that the best way to use Marines though? Kind of in that fashion. I would think
I
just
would
like
think so.
stir the hornet's nest, release them, bring them back. I mean, that's how Ranger Battalion works. Similar way, you know?
Yeah. And we did, I think, what they wanted us to do. We completed the mission that we were supposed to complete, and then back on ship and back to the training and stuff that we were supposed to do beforehand. And obviously, a little bit worse for wear, but made it,
Yeah. But obviously those times, the trade-off is those aren't fun days.
No, and it was a lot of, I used to hate, like, when we'd come back, I would definitely hate like going to the chow hall and like walking around in the camps and stuff. The Air Force had the best ones, obviously, but when we'd go to a base and they'd have, I remember in Al-Qaeda, which was like just outside of like big train station down there in that region. And we had gone to this base. They had a little PX. They had this, we had to take a bus to the chow hall. We literally slept on the flight line a couple of nights, like under our trucks and stuff to stay out of the dust. We were there and there really wasn't a place for us. So it's one of those things where, obviously it's a combat zone. We're not expecting like a Hilton or anything crazy like that, but it's like, we would get to some of these spots and it's like, it's almost as if the units that we were there to help didn't really expect us to be there, right? Like
Sure.
Nobody knew that we were coming, or nobody knew that this was happening because there was nowhere for us to go. So we'd sleep under the trucks, or we'd sleep in the trucks, or we'd sleep out on the flight line, or,
Was there animosity then with those units? Like, do you guys talk shit about the, yeah.
I mean, not necessarily with like other regular units, obviously with radio battalions, because there's always a thing between infantry and radio. But, for the most part, it was like, man, these guys have it really, really nicely. And we just spent the last 2 weeks like picking dust out of, everywhere, sleeping on the ground, sleeping outside. I remember we were in one of these towns and we had laid down, it was an unfinished house that we had, occupied. And it still had like a rebar foundation grid, like they were going to pour the foundation. And there were stacks of like the ready mix concrete bags. And we just piled a bunch of those on the floor and made beds out of, concrete bags to sleep on, because it was better than sleeping on the rebar, So
That's awesome.
Well, those are the most proud sleeps ever, though. Just knowing you're better than everybody else.
Yeah. So we'd have to, we'd do that. And then we'd go back to like a base to, rearm or refit or whatever it was. Be like, man, these guys got it really nice. What a bunch of jerks.
Well, being in attachment sucks, and that's what you guys were, it sounds like.
Yeah.
It sucks. I agree. I got attached one time for like a month to a different company, and just that in the same battalion, and they didn't know how to use us. Same thing, same battalion, and it's just like, it's not the same, because everyone's protecting their own and trying to hoard resources, and there's, you had to steal your Humvees.
Well, we didn't. I mean, technically,
appropriate.
Statute of limitations. I think you're good.
If I remember,
I should say acquire. That's the proper.
If I remember the company gunny's information, it was that when they went, right, they had signed out X amount of Humvees. You go through with the guy at the motor pool and you check off the list, the numbers, whatever the numbers are. But then there was like a whole section of Humvees that weren't on the list, had no, like, they were there, they were serialized, but they weren't on that guy's list. So we may have went off with a couple of those too.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to miss them because nobody knows they're there. So
exactly. That's the nature of those deals. But it's, some personality dynamics for sure when it's, I don't know. Stewie keeps mentioning about being aggressive. I thought it was very very aggressive. Very, I don't want to say hateful, but like, and I don't even say competitive, but it was very close circled. Everybody was very tight circled, even with the companies against the battalion and other units, even in the
Yeah,
brigade for us. Very competitive. Like,
when
we
we were
just didn't
on
like anybody.
when we were on al-Assad, like on the airbase for the short amount of time, I think in total we probably only did maybe 2 or 3 weeks over that whole period where we were actually on like inside the wire at al-Assad Air Base. And I don't remember talking to anybody except guys from my unit when we would go to like the chow hall or we'd go to the PX, like nobody, right? You're same thing, like nobody really wanted to talk to anybody else. Yeah, it was kind of weird. I guess I never really thought about it, I guess before, but looking back at it, it's like, yeah, we didn't really interact with anybody else, any other military guys or anything. We dealt with we used to hang out and talk with the Nigerian guards that were there on al-Assad, though. Those guys were cool. Yeah, those guys were cool. They were essentially, I don't know what their real job was as part of like the International Assistance Force, but I think it was literally just to police the bases, make sure that people aren't, Army and Marines aren't fighting and nobody's, beating each other up in the street. Like that was kind of their job.
Nobody's stealing Humvees, I got you.
Yeah, they were super cool.
Yeah, I think it became more common too, to outsource that security.
I think one of the reasons it's hard to tell the story about things that happened in Iraq and Afghanistan is it's murky, and like there's different elements you're fighting at different times in the country. But like I'll try to set the stage a little bit to kind of the Anbar area. So either one of you guys correct me because I'm going top of mind here. But Anbar is western Iraq, west of Baghdad, and there's something called the Euphrates River Valley that runs through Anbar, west to east, I believe. In this area, you've got places like Ramadi and Fallujah, and it kind of funnels up into Syria, where a lot of foreign fighters are coming through, which is one of the reasons that the fighting in Ramadi, Fallujah, and that whole valley was pretty nasty. Is it wasn't all, disaffected Iraqi citizens that were just maybe fighting for their freedom or maybe had a bad experience with Americans, so they picked up a weapon or buried an IED. There were a lot of foreign fighters, well-trained foreign fighters, and for a big stretch of time, al-Qaeda in Iraq, which were, there's probably a better way to put this, but professionals, well-trained, well-equipped, well-funded. And you guys, if I'm not mistaken, with Steel Curtain, you were right up there on the Syrian border, which probably means you were going toe-to-toe with al-Qaeda. Is that accurate?
Well, and that was actually the goal, I think, of that entire operation. When you look at when you look at commander's intent, whether it's the battalion or it was the Iraqi assistance force, the goal was to retake that area because we had, the military had taken it and lost it and taken it and lost it a few times before that. I don't want to point any fingers, but the last people that had it happened to be an Army unit, and you just with resources the way they are, you got to pool your resources. And with Fallujah and Ramadi and those taking so much effort, it was you pull back from some of those more rural areas. And what I guess kind of happened in the meantime was there was nobody kind of regulating that area. So some of the towns that we had gone into, they hadn't had regular shipments of like food and grains and stuff that they would need to survive. I mean, the logistics of those areas were just completely shot. They were either cut off by us from the east, or they were cut off by al-Qaeda and these other fighters from the west. So they were essentially stuck in a no man's land. And our goal was to drop us on that side at the Syrian border, work our way back towards the east, towards American forces, and kind of push all those fighters in between us so that they didn't have anywhere to go. It worked. I think it was great.
It's looking for a fight. I mean, you were picking a fight. Yeah.
That was the goal. We had to retake that area, and the best way to do that was to cut them off at the Syrian border, and everybody that's still in the country push them back towards our own guys.
Police call.
You say
west to east. Yeah, west to east.
Yeah, west to east.
It's like hammer anvil stuff.
Yep.
Did that turn kinetic pretty quick? Was that? It seems like, I don't know.
Looking back at it, it doesn't really doesn't feel like it, but I think we we took our very first casualty was, I think we had one in October. It was a vehicle accident, was the first, actual casualty for the company.
Mm-hmm.
But, our first like combat casualty was actually, I believe the very first one was Major Ray Mendoza, who was our Echo Company commander,
Wow.
a giant of a man, on a mine. And I mean, that was literally minutes after we stepped off, to start the actual fight. Yeah. So, I mean, it was the first day really, we got dropped off in the middle of the desert. You could see the Syrian border. You could see, I don't think there were tanks. They were like Syria's version of like a Bradley or like a LAV or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could see them patrolling the hillside on the Syrian side. And I'm sure they were doing the same thing we were. Like, we're just looking at each other through like binos or,
Yeah. Look at those
trying
guys.
to see like, oh, what is that? Yeah. And so we, got there the day and early in the morning we stepped off and had that first casualty within the first couple of minutes. And then it was like, all right, well, this is real now. But, as far as combat went in Iraq, it was really intense for like 5 minutes and then just hours of nothing. I say nothing, but it's like hours of us, clearing houses and kicking indoors and throwing flashbangs and prepping buildings and all this. And then you'd get into another firefight or you'd go a few hours with nothing, but like guys on the far end of the phase line or whatever are getting fight after fight after fight. And then you'd get into a fight and they'd have nothing for hours, right? You'd get into fight after fight after fight. So it was like, I don't know, everybody think like in the movies, right? I'm sure every combat veteran probably says the same thing. It's like the movies make it look like super cool, but it's just, you get 5 or 10 minutes of like really intense fighting and then it's just weeks of just boredom.
But I feel like Sayre and I did not deploy to a very urban area. There were houses there, but we were just not clearing room to room at all. It feels like that would be such an emotional drain, knowing that every single door could turn into a 5-10 minute or more just chaotic fight.
Were they real quick, I want to mention on the house to house part, you mentioned the mine with Major Mendoza, which by the way, I went to Ohio State. He's an Ohio State grad. He's like a legend there. They've been to haul after him. He was he was like a 4-year letterman in wrestling. I think he was like an Olympic. I think he like made the team or was an alternate, something like that. So, and he would have been killed. I would have been like a sophomore there, at that time, or freshman. I can't remember, but so I definitely know that name. But you mentioned he stepped on the mine. Is that going like what type of mine are we talking about? Are they doing house borns? Is that a threat? Tripwires? What does that look like when you're doing all of this stuff?
So I think, and I don't know how accurate this was. I mean, he was a big guy, but the information that we had at the time, and that I think still is maybe the urban legend here, is that it was actually an AT mine. And this was like,
anti-tank.
Yeah. And I don't know how big you have to be to set that off, but if a man can do it, then he would have been the guy to do it.
Right.
I mean, he just built like a brick house, big dude. And the area that we started in wasn't an urban area. We had drove out to the middle of the desert and parked and had to walk into that first section. So I'm sure that I don't know if I have any pictures of it, in the post that I was doing last year, but there's parts where like everybody's kind of below this berm out in the middle of the desert and it's dawn. And I mean, that's really what it looked like. We probably walked for a couple of miles before we really hit that first town in Huseba, which was, that far west side.
Are you walking on road staggered column? Are you walking through fields? Are you bounding? Like, how are you guys doing this movement?
The initial step off was, so we had it in phase lines, but each company kind of walked their own section. And the initial step was staggered columns. And then once we got to, once everybody kind of got out of the berm and the low-lying area that we were in, what they call them, wadis, I think they call them out there.
Yeah.
Once we get out, into the actual like flat ground desert, then it was kind of, online or as much online as you can get, because the idea was to show force at that point.
Yeah.
Like, look at all the people that we have, and then go through that first initial town, because the intel was that we didn't have, there wasn't anybody in that portion. It was a border town. It wasn't supposed to be, and then of course we get into the actual areas that we have to clear with 3-6 on one side and us on the other side. And we ended up in this area called the 440 district, which was a urban planned 440 house square.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was nonstop, clearing rooms, clearing buildings, clearing houses, just nonstop for the, hours, days. I don't even know how long we were there. And that one was, every couple of minutes, somebody would start shooting at something, or somebody would start getting shot at, or a helicopter would go and like had to take down a water tower. And there was just stuff happening all over the place. When the initial intel was that it probably wasn't going to be, there wasn't supposed to be a whole lot there.
I'm in a hotel at Fort Sill right now, and I'm thinking when it comes to urban combat, I think a lot of people think of like this now becomes the battleground, and there's every room on every floor could have somebody in the corner waiting with a rifle to kill the person who walks in the door. That by itself is an incredible headache to clear even a house, let alone a hotel. But that's not getting into when the enemy has time to build defensive positions and put a few sandbags in or cut holes in the wall they're going to shoot through. What was it like? Did you guys, were they hasty defensive positions, or are these guys dug in some areas?
So most of it, especially the first sections, right? The Husayba, Karabla, the Triangle, a lot of that was kind of hasty positions, right? They didn't really do anything to the houses. They just happened to be in them.
Sure.
A lot of the ones that I can remember, clearly, a lot of those guys were on the roofs, and a lot of those buildings were kind of set up the same way, where the houses were kind of cookie cutter from one another. It's a couple of rooms on the bottom floor. If it had a second floor, there were a couple of rooms, but there was almost always a stairway to the roof with a little door or little outcropping or whatever up from the roof that had a door on it. So a lot of times they'd be in that. They'd be in that doorway, or like just inside the doorway, trying to shoot out from that, where they could see but still kind of be in cover. It didn't seem like they really wanted to fight inside the houses very much, which was great because we didn't really want to fight inside the houses. But the way that the stuff was designed there, it was kind of all designed the same. So once we'd gone through a couple of handfuls of the designs, it was super easy to like really streamline the process of getting in and getting through it and clearing the whole thing. One of our biggest problems was we'd get to sections where you couldn't go from this house there to go back down or whatever, right? So you'd get to the top of one house, and if it was like townhouses are here, where they're adjoining, sharing an adjoining wall, and there'd be a 2 or 3 foot wall between the two rooftops. So we'd go up some, clear that one, hop the wall, clear from the top down to the other one. So we're kind of constantly going up and down, up and down, up and down. It made it way faster for us than coming back out, running around to the other side, getting the next one, going up, going back down. So we were able to really start moving through these houses pretty quick and getting these areas cleared pretty quickly. So then really the only running that we had to do was sprinting from one side of the street to the other. And that, after like figuring that out, like 3 days of clearing houses and finally figuring out like we could really streamline this process, it really saved a lot of our guys. Obviously the emotional toll or the psychological toll of not knowing what's behind every single door was offset by the fact that we were actually able to save some energy by not having to run balls out all the time, to do every single one of these houses. We had, we knew what the fastest route was going to be, so we'd be able to take a second, get your stuff together. If you had to reload or you had to fix your equipment or something broke or whatever, we were able to kind of consolidate those portions so that we could save as much energy as possible.
Did you guys have any armor while you were doing this?
We did not. So we did, but we didn't. There were a few portions of the of like steel curtain and then Iron Hammer, I think, was the one after that. There were a few portions that where we actually had a tank platoon assigned to us, which was cool. First time ever working with tanks. It was a lot of fun to like watch them crash through stuff and blow things up.
Yeah.
But like we're an infantry unit. We were supposed to be a motorized infantry unit, meaning we were supposed to like get in the back of Humvees and get in the back of trucks. And like I didn't see a truck once except when it dropped us off and like would come and you know drop off ammo and stuff. We walked pretty much everywhere. So you know we would have the tank platoon with us for some portions, and then they'd go and you know they were assigned to the battalion, so they'd go and hit some other companies or that. And then we had the cat platoon. We had cat red and cat blue, which were the Humvee mounted, you know, heavy weapons, the anti-tank, the anti-armor stuff. And every now and then we would see those guys and we'd work with those guys. But for the most part, we were kind of set up with Echo, Fox, and Golf, you know, set along these city sections. And we were just on foot running through the city.
How long was Steel Curtain? Couple weeks?
So I think the original portion started, I think it was October 5th, maybe, or somewhere in October.
Major Mendoza was killed in November.
So I think it was November 5th. I think it was November 5th to November 20 something.
3 weeks on or about.
Yeah. It was almost the month of November. Because I know that was the beginning of it was essentially was him, you know, being killed. And then it was just a few days after the 16th, which was, you know, the ambush that I was in. A few days after that is when like Steel Curtain officially ended. And then we started moving into I think the Marine Corps, you know, or the ISAF or whatever started shifting into the Iron Hammer portion of it.
And no showers that whole time, right? So you're getting nice and fresh.
Only when we got back to Al-Assad. So like 2 or 3 weeks, no shower, baby wipe baths. You know,
and you guys are moving as a whole battalion, right? During all of this. I mean, it's all everybody. When you're clearing these buildings, it's company movements, platoons are bounding.
And that was, as far as the momentum of it goes, that was probably one of the worst parts is, you know, us as a company. So, you know, each company had their sections and it was all laid out on somebody's map somewhere. And within that company, you know, each platoon had their section. And, you know, as a company, our platoons, our rifle platoons would move up we were pretty much on pace with each other. But, you know, we'd hit a phase line and sometimes we'd have to wait at this phase line for the other companies to catch up. And, you know, sometimes it was 10 minutes and sometimes it was hours.
Right.
Where, you know, we're that far ahead of them for whatever reason, right? Maybe they, you know, if they have bigger buildings. I know there was one section where we had a school we had to clear, which took us forever. But, you know, stuff like that where, you know, we hit a phase line and then we know that there's more to do. Literally across the street, there's more buildings that we should be clearing, but we have to set down and, you know, set up like a security posture because we can't cross that phase line until everybody's ready. Because if we do, there's the potential for, you know, issues, blue on blue, or there's another unit moving ahead of us going, you know, across this way or some, you know, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
So
Huge
like
thing to
that,
have to track. It's important though.
right? Well, and like Preston was saying, where, you know, if you're running through that and you're amped up and you're ready to go, and then all of a sudden somebody says like, hey, we just got to wait here for them to catch up, and why are we waiting? Like, you know, we can do this. Let's go do this. So
That's
I think
the
that
anger
was
and the fuel right there. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. So I think that was like a big thing. It's like, what are we waiting for? Let's go.
Were
Josh,
you moving real quick? I'm so curious on the maneuvering. So would you be maneuvering as an entire platoon with another platoon on overwatch, like on the roofs, while one platoon is doing this sort of up and down, they get a foothold, then the next platoon, or what does that look like?
No, so we were all the way that, and I can't speak for the other two companies, but the way that our company was working is, you know, we were set up essentially on line left to right. We all pushed off from the same thing. From, say we hit a phase line, we're waiting. All right, so we're at a phase line, we're ready to go. We would do it by squads, really. So, you know, whatever first platoon was doing was on them, whatever third platoon was doing was on them, and then our platoon would go
Yeah.
Fire teams to a house, and we just bound each other's teams.
I got it.
So that way you have some respite, right? You're not going house to house to house all the time, but
Sure.
yeah, I mean, essentially it was every other house or every third house was your team.
And that makes sense when you said it was online. It almost has to be. So yeah, I'm just trying to picture it in my head how you guys were. But yeah, platoon autonomy. They had their left and right limits, interlocking fields of fire. There you go.
Yeah, and we were lucky enough, especially in that first section, like the 440 district was, I mean, almost a perfect square. So that was easy one for us to like get online and track, with the streets as phase lines or whatever they were using for phase lines. It was super easy for us to move that way. And then when we got out of Husayba and Karabla and we started moving into like old Ubaidi and stuff, where that was more of a farmland area, right? The buildings were much more spread out, not necessarily in even lines with each other. So you might have one guy in a building way up here, but he's still technically, in the line of fire for this one. So if something gets between us, then it's an issue. But the first, week or two or so, we didn't have to worry about that at all, which was nice.
Josh, you mentioned the ambush on November 16th, which is about the halfway point of Steel Curtain. Is that something you can add context to, or do you want to keep moving through the battle?
Yeah. If you want to, I mean, we can. I'm an open book. If you want to talk about it, we can talk about it.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, that was what prompted an unknown person a year ago or something to say you should check out Josh, and it sounds like a pretty. I mean, it doesn't sound like a very long period of time. It was kind of the hot and heavy few minutes, right? I
actually have. During this portion, we were lucky enough or unlucky enough to actually have a combat artist with us. Michael Fay, who was one of the few combat artists that the Marine Corps had, was actually assigned to us or attached to us for that portion. So it's really cool. So he's actually got, he's got a lot of pictures that he's done. Some of them are in the Marine Corps Museum, which is cool. But he had a lot of photographs and actually some audio that he had recorded of that morning.
No kidding.
So that actually gave us a pretty good timeline. I think I have a digital copy of that on a CD somewhere. But it's like 8 o'clock or 8:05 or something in the morning, where the firefight had already started, and he got onto his recorder and started kind of talking his way through it. And I think I want to say maybe the medevac chopper had been called in by 9 o'clock. So 45 minutes, I think, maybe total. It wasn't I mean, it seems like it was a really long portion of time, which I think is a common conception.
A long fight,
for that. But there was a lot of stuff going on. And from start to finish, I think it was maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. And part of that is obviously afterwards, right? The consolidation and going back through and doing back clearing or whatever. So the actual firefight portion may have only been 10 or 15 minutes.
That's still,
that's
I think
still
it's hard to explain how that's an eternity, right? Especially in that close quarter situation.
Well, my impression is, I think time slows in those scenarios. What do you think? And I think that's why it lasts longer. It's a weird slowness that happens.
I think, and I don't think you think about it at the time, but like going back and thinking about stuff is you do a lot of stuff in a very short period of time. So it doesn't seem like it's the actual amount of time that it was, right? Like there was a lot of stuff that, that I did and that other Marines did that it seems like, well, when you look at it and you think about it in a practical sense of how quickly you could normally do some of these things, either you were moving really, really fast or time was moving really, really slow.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Well, that's the training. I mean, you're not thinking. You get the thinking out of it and just the doing part, the react to contact. What was the contact? We keep saying ambush. What was the contact?
So when we had pushed through, Husayba, then we went into Karabla and what they call this HK triangle, which was this area in between the two, kind of a sparsely populated area between the two cities. So we pushed through all those, and that was kind of the intense house-to-house stuff, right? Constantly going. And then we had switched to this old Ubaidi, which is more of farmy area, and like New Ubaidi, which was again another like planned section. New Ubaidi was when I was referring to like we do a lot of the going up and jumping the wall and going down, like that was New Ubaidi. It was like apartment buildings or like townhouses, like they had a lot of that in that section. And the old Ubaidi was along the actual Euphrates River. If you, when you look at a map on it, there's actually a section, if you go from Syria and you follow the river around, there's a section that it carves out that actually looks like a heart. And that's the old Ubaidi section that we kind of got funneled into. Part of our AO, and on the other side of that was an Army unit. And if I remember correctly, 3-6 had actually remained in Husaybah and Karabalah to set up patrol bases there. So, once we shifted out of that section, we were by ourselves. Not necessarily by ourselves, obviously, because there's a ton of guys in country, but like we were doing that section as a battalion. So we get funneled into, that section of Old Ubaidi, which was great because that's where we were chasing these guys to. They also got funneled into that. My complaint with rules of engagement changing comes in, at a certain point we had been told that like no more prepping buildings, right? No more shooting rockets into buildings that aren't complying with the rules that we gave them, right? Open your windows, unlock your doors, lift your trunks up like on your cars and stuff, right? So when we would run into buildings that were like that and they were locked or curtains were drawn or the cars weren't open and we couldn't open them on the first try, send a law into that thing or send an AT4 into that thing. Like we're just not going to deal with it. So they wanted to cut down on collateral damage, which I get. It doesn't look by it. How are we going to win the hearts and minds if we're over here destroying everything? I get it. So rules of engagement shifted, which meant that resupply shifted. So now we're not getting resupplied with rockets and grenades as often as we were because we're not using them as often as we were. As we're going through this, this older section of farmhouses, we run into a building that was kind of half compliant. The door was unlocked, but all the curtains were drawn. The minivan that was parked next to the house was unlocked, but the back of it wasn't open, right? So it's like they kind of tried, but they, turns out it was a ruse. We didn't have the fire team that was actually going to clear the building was the first fire team in my squad. And they moved up to the building. They were going to pop the door, throw in a grenade. They didn't have any hand grenades. All they had was a flashbang because we hadn't been resupplied, so they didn't have any hand grenades. Not that that's logistics fault or anything like that. Like, those guys all did a great job.
Right.
But they just didn't have one. And so they popped the door, threw the flashbang, let it breathe for a second. They went in. As soon as they cleared the door, they started taking fire. And this was one of those sections where, previously up into till this point, we hadn't really run into real set prepared defenses. A lot of ours was hasty defense. Guys, we were just running through stuff. This one, they had the spider holes cut in the walls. They had furniture stacked up so that if we had come in and, engaged from a standing position or like a, crouching position or whatever, the furniture was going to take the brunt of that force from those rounds. Not that it would have stopped them completely, but, it still would slow them down a little bit. And these guys were set up to shoot underneath that. So a lot of the wounds, a lot of the gunshot wounds that our guys received were in the thigh or like the lower abdomen or, like essentially under where our plates were going to be. So it took a lot of rounds to the waist, a lot of rounds to the legs. And that was the entire first fire team out. Nobody on the radio, can't get a hold of anybody on the radio. All we hear is, that house is now a war zone within a war zone. And, we're trying to get them on the radio, nothing. And we were lucky enough at this point to where I think other units weren't. We had given all of our guys a PRR. So they all had personal roll radios. So everybody in the company had a radio. So when that fire team went down, I could try to call him, the squad leader could try to call him, our team leader could try to call him, whatever.
Yeah.
Nobody's answering on the radio from that platoon. So each platoon, I was able to talk to everybody in my platoon. I couldn't talk to everybody in the company though, right?
Mm-hmm.
So go through that, go over to the squad leader, him and my team leader, like the three of us are talking, like, we don't know, we can't get a hold of him. We don't know what's going on. I was sent as a runner to go talk to the platoon sergeant, talk to him, come back, made a quick plan. And then me, my team leader, and our saw gunner, because we only had 3 guys in the team since we were undermanned. The 3 of us, well, it's our squad, it's our job. So we make the rush across. I think it was like 25 or 75 yards, or 75 yards or 75 feet. One of those two.
75 something.
Yeah, from the from the building that we were at to the building that they were at.
Mm-hmm.
So we go, and I mean, as soon as we get there, I start yelling with McGee, who was actually one of the engineers that was assigned to us. Him and I made that first run, and McGee had actually taken a round in the leg on the way over there. So the original plan obviously fell to shit too, because now there's only 2 of us there, and we need to figure out what we're doing with these guys. So I get over there yelling for anybody essentially from the fire team. And as I'm getting there, like as I'm setting up on the one side of the window close to the minivan, the saw gunner actually comes crawling out of the building. Not hang on. The grenadier, so Portillo, at the time, Lance Corporal Portillo, comes crawling out of the building. So Mendez, who was the saw gunner, was actually outside the building still. So I don't think he ever made it in the building, or he did make it in the building, but made it out right away. But he was outside before I got there. So it was, when I get there, I'm asking him like, hey, what's going on? Where is everybody? Like and I went to boot camp with this guy. Like we grew up in the Marine Corps together. I mean, he looks at me and he's like, I have no idea. So like, oh, great. It's, let's try to figure it out now. So we're sitting there yelling, and Portillo comes crawling out of the building, and he's got, just his face just covered in blood. He had taken, he's not a short guy, but he's kind of short. But he had actually taken a round to the forehead, hit the night vision mount, hit his helmet, and just left just a big welt on his forehead, luckily. But he, was a headshot, and he'd taken blood. So, it looked bad.
Sure. Yeah.
So that was the first thing we did was, Mendez and I take Portillo, and we take him back to, make that run again, take him back to where the company was. Got to set up a CCP now, got to try to get information from him and find out what's going on. Get a little bit of information. He kind of tells us where they went in the house, because the way that the house was set up, I guess. So me and Lucente and Rogers, who are my team leader and the saw gunner, we go back across, we make it back across, and we start, the process of going into the house to start extricating those guys, right? Trying to find those guys, figure out where they're at, take the fight back into the house and get our guys out of there. While this is happening, the mass casualty had already gone out over the radio. So our second platoon, who was attached to the tanks, wasn't, they weren't doing house to house stuff. They were patrolling with the tanks through this area. So they're, attached to the tanks. They got the radio on the back of the tank. Like all of a sudden the mass casualty comes out, and like these tanks come flying down the road. And like our guys are, trying to keep up with the tanks as the tanks are going like 56 miles an hour or whatever. I don't know how fast an Abrams go, but it was fast.
Yeah.
And so these guys are running behind them, trying to keep up. And, the tanks get there, which is cool, but they're essentially useless, right? Because they can't fire into this house because we still have guys in there. And they can't get in between us and the house because we have to go into the house, right? So they kind of just sit. And so second squad starts moving up on the house and starts, the same thing. They start firing back at the enemy, and they start making a plan to start getting people out of the house. And there wasn't a whole lot of good options for us as far as how we do this, just because of the way the houses were set up. There was in front of, so if you're looking at the front of the house, there's like a window on the left side, there's a window on the right side, and the front door is kind of like this way. So you're not looking directly in the front door. You have to like get up to the thing and turn left to get into the front door. And so there's a big like open, window here. And then just next to that is like a carport where there's this minivan. So they're getting, as they get up there out in the front yard, I don't know the distance between the house and this wall, but there's like a little retaining wall essentially. So once you get over this wall, there's nothing between you and this house. There's not a ton of space to go. Well, besides defenses inside the house, these guys had also set up firing positions outside the house. Sure. So as second squad comes from the, the area that they're coming from the tanks, and they start getting over this wall, they immediately start taking fire. Javier Alvarez, who's the squad leader for second squad, immediately takes rounds in the legs. So now he's, on the ground in front of this house. There's a couple other guys that, take some fire back and forth. And so Javi, got hit in the legs, hits the ground. Now they're out there. There's grenades coming from all over the place, right? From out of the house, from over in the side area. They were able to put down the guys outside that, had started taking them pretty easily. But now there's still like grenades going all over the place. Javi actually ended up, he's sitting, he can't move. His legs are messed up now, but so he's sitting there, grenade lands right next to him, right between him and a couple other guys. Man, he picks it up, throws it, goes off just maybe a couple of feet from his hand, loses the hand. Luckily only loses the hand. A couple other guys, some shrapnel. One of the team leaders from second squad, shattered his forearm on the one side from the, not from that grenade, but from grenades at various points. And I mean, now like, it's a mess, right? Yeah. It's just a mess. We've got machine gunners, like people are just trying to get there because now we've got more casualties, right? Now there's guys taking fire at the front, there's guys taking fire outside. We still have the guys inside the building, and people are starting to go down left and right. We're one of the machine gunners ended up getting killed out front, and now we've got like corpsmen there that are trying to do as much as they can right there because we can't move. We got to try to get them set up before we can move these guys because it's, stuff's happening so quick. And one of the corpsmen was in my squad, one of the corpsmen was in second squad, so both of them are there now. They both end up getting taken out by grenades. Luckily, neither of them were killed, but they're both take a ton of shrapnel and they're kind of out. So I mean, now we're racking up this casualty count, and it just keeps going and going. And Lucente, me, and Rogers finally, simultaneously while all this is happening, we're inside the building now. We go in, we start to do what we can to locate the two guys that we haven't accounted for, Corporal Ware and Lance Corporal Sandbeck. Go in, find them, pull Sandbeck out, go in, find Ware, pull Ware out. And I think Ware is actually the one that the machine gunner was assisting the corpsman with when the machine gunner was killed and the corpsmen were injured. I think that was Ware out on the front of the building, and Ware ended up passing away too. So now we've got, as far as we know, most of the people are out of the house. Well, we still got all these casualties and stuff out front. And as we know, as a brand new, fresh infantry Marine, man, I want to get in there and get in the fight because the best medicine on the battlefield is fire superiority, right? Mm-hmm. So we go in as we're coming out with, as we're in there with, Sandbeck and Ware, we go back in the building, and Lucente actually ends up getting, taking some rounds from a spider hole in the bathroom. So now Lucente is down. So Rogers and I are out front. Okay, well, Lucente's back in there. We got to go back in and get him. Excuse me. So I know exactly where he is. That's, not going to be too big of a problem. Go back in, grab him. As we're pulling him out, the lieutenant passes us up. So I'm coming out, lieutenant's going in, and our platoon commander. Mm-hmm. So as he's going in, more gunfire, more explosions. We come out. He never comes back out. So now Rogers and I are like, okay, well, where is he at? And Roger said he never came out. So, okay, well, we need to go get him. So we go back in, get him, come back out. And that was actually the last time that I saw Rogers alive, was when I told him I was going back in to get lieutenant. So when I went back in and got McLaughlin, bring him back out, and Rogers wasn't even there, right? It wasn't like he came back out and he was, down and injured or whatever. Like, I never saw him again. So sometime between when I went back into the building to get McLaughlin and when I got, McLaughlin out of that building, Rogers had already been picked up and moved over to the CCP. So, so now I got the lieutenants down, go back and talk to the platoon commander or platoon sergeant, who's Gunny Homer, or Staff Sergeant Homer at the time. Go talk to him. He says, okay, he comes with me. We grab the lieutenant. We take the lieutenant over to the CCP. And, somewhere within that time frame, second squad had kind of secured the front of the building. Most of the casualties, if not all of the casualties, had already been moved over to the CCP. Stuff was kind of in that in that portion where it's like starting to slow down, but you're still like in the middle of combat. I ran over to where like the company commander and stuff was, where the machine gunners were set up. This is the portion I was talking about where like it seems like I did a lot, and it should have taken me a long time to do a lot of this stuff. But like running over to the machine gunners and kind of directing their fire was one of those things that I must have just done it, and it seems like it should have taken me forever because of the distance. But I mean, it was like directed their fire to a certain area. They ended up, lighting this guy up behind a bunch of barrels of fuel, set him on fire. It was kind of a neat thing to watch.
Yeah. Who'd thought that would actually happen?
Right.
Actually shoot the barrels.
Well, I don't know if that's what set it on fire, but potentially, I guess if you got tracers and stuff in there, you could have.
Yeah.
But somehow or another, that got set on fire. He was shot and then became on fire as well. And then as the get to the portion where like, okay, well, we need to finish this because there's a lot of stuff going on. We need to go back into that house. There's still guys in there. Not our guys, but there's enemies in there. So it's like, again, as that fresh, Marine infantry rifleman, I want to go and I want to take the fight to the enemy. I run back up there. I remember asking one of the guys if anybody had any hand grenades, because I didn't have any hand grenades. And Lance Corporal Ortiz, who was another guy that I went to SOI with and stuff, and I've known him for a long time, he like turns around, he hands me a hand grenade, I take it, and I didn't say anything to anybody else, and I right around that door into the building. Luckily, somebody was paying attention because Mayfield, who's another guy, like he just followed me right in there. We went right back into the building. We went room to room to room to room. Ended up using a grenade. Ended up taking fire from a guy that was essentially at like the back door of the hallway. Put him down pretty quick. Made it through the rest of the house, out the back door to where the guy that was on fire was at. As we come out the door, and I turn to clear the outside, so I turn left and I go up. Guy standing there. We exchange rounds, a couple of rounds. I shoot a couple of rounds at him. He shoots a couple of rounds at me. One of those rounds actually hits the bolt of my rifle. A couple of rounds in the magazine, and one round into the bolt. So I have a dead rifle now. Luckily, Mayfield followed me. So as I like turn to now get back into the building, he comes up with his rifle and ends up putting that guy down.
Wow.
And then so we do that. I'm back in the building. My rifle's screwed. He comes back in as we're in the building. The logistics commander and the operations chief from both captains from our headquarters unit are both in the building now. And they had both come from wherever they were at in the battalion line. They had both come over to where we're at. So the logistics captain came over with some of his guys and like just a ton of ammo. Right.
There we go.
He brought rockets and grenades and mortars and all sorts of stuff. But he dismounted and ended up coming in the building with the other captain. They came in specifically to get us because he came in to tell us that air was already on the way and they were going to level this building. So like we needed to go.
Yeah.
So we met the two captains like back in the house as we're going back through, and the four of us like got out and went over to the CCP, and everybody was gone. And eventually the helicopters came and threw a couple of rockets or missiles into it. I'm not sure which ones they used, and took out the rest of the house. And then we had our mortar team, which they did a phenomenal job. I actually used a video of them as a example when I was in squad leaders course, because they told me that like, I guess there's some by the book how close mortars are supposed to be to each other to make sure that they're not like messing with each other's, trajectories or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I remember telling the guy like, hey, I've seen them do it closer than that. And I mean, these guys, the 361s that they had set up were probably within a 3 feet of each other. I mean, a small triangle. They had these 3 guns set up, and I mean, they're just dropping them in. And they, at the time, I'm not quite sure the legality of how mortars would go, but it was a shake and bake, right? It was Willie Pete and high explosive. So, and they were just hanging these rounds down, and I mean, just dead on the whole time. They're just constantly shifting those guns. They did a great job. But there was behind the buildings, between the houses and the river, was a palm grove. So like that's where these guys had, the guys that made it out of the house and wanted to retreat. Well, they were in the palm grove thinking that they were home free. And I mean, these guys just did a phenomenal job of putting them down where they were standing. These going through and some of the pictures, like the after action stuff and doing the reports and all that, there's actually pictures like some of these guys thought they thought that they were out of the fight enough that they had stopped to go to the bathroom and had their pants pulled down to their ankles and stuff. So they did not expect us to continue bringing that fight to them for sure. And after all that was set up and the medevacs were in and air was done and the mortars were done, we did the ACE report and trying to figure out who's where. And turns out me and the squad leader were the only 2 left of 3rd squad, and everybody else getting on a helicopter and going back to Al Assad.
Jesus, man. That's all?
That's it. And then I spent 2 days sleeping on a pile of onions in a different house.
I was about to ask, how hard did you crash after all that? So 2 days is...
Yeah, well, not for the full. I didn't sleep the full 2 days. I think I had. So afterwards, right? We did my whole squad's gone. Now I get like attached kind of to either squad as needed. And I think for like 2 days straight, I went on just about every patrol they would let me go on. Right? If 1st squad was going out, I was going. If 2nd squad was going out, I was going. So like everyone I could get onto, I went. The rifle that had the grenade launcher on it was out of commission, so I had just a regular rifle. So like I dropped half my kit, right? I just had a couple of magazines, the one in the gun, a couple of magazines in my person. I was running real slick, which in hindsight, like, why the fuck would I do that? It was stupid, right?
Do you think
but I think that was kind of the psychological thing. It's like, all right, well, it didn't happen to me yet. Like if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen.
I was going to say, do you think you crossed into a borderline reckless mindset there for a period of time?
Yeah, I think I was taking probably more risk than I needed to, because, whether it was survivor's guilt or whatever it was. But yeah, that lasted like 2 or 3 days, and then I was kind of over it, and I was tired, and yeah, spent some time sleeping on onions, sleeping on the floor. But we were there. We were probably, I think, in Ubaidi, like in that same area, right? Within a couple of houses from that house, for probably almost 3 or 4 days before we finally left to go back and start the next, the Iron Hammer phase of the operation. So, I mean, it was 3 or 4 days before we even knew, or before I even knew the status of a lot of those guys, because we didn't have contact with them. I'm sure somebody in the company did, but I didn't.
And then, so you guys you said several more days of that particular clearance op. So when you were done with that, then you guys just go back to some main fob, refit before you do the next push?
the ambush and like the mass casualty event was essentially the end of our portion of Steel Curtain. The section of houses that we were at was really the end of our area. Not just because of the casualty event, but because like this was literally the last place we were going.
Yeah.
That makes sense if you think about it, though. I mean, you were squashing their zone of operation, and then that's the hammer and the anvil, and it was at the very end, and you got them cornered, and they're going to fight back. I mean, they're cornered, literally fighting for their lives, so it's going to be nasty. You would think it was nasty.
Yeah, it was, and so we were there a couple more days and set up, some security patrols around the area and kind of tried to do the coin stuff with those people that live there. And
yeah,
it worked a little, it probably worked a little bit,
Yeah.
Depends on what you think.
How did you feel about that, doing those patrols, the coin ones going on those versus the kinetic ones right after that sort of ordeal?
It was kind of a nice change of pace.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, I don't think that the counterinsurgency posture that the U.S. adopted was the correct one. I think there are some things that we could have done better and some things that we should have done definitely differently.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's hard, not to go too far into it, but it's hard to do counterinsurgency with the unit that just spent a week blowing up your town, right? I think that you should be removed
and having
from
their
that.
friends die, right? Like that's what
Right.
I'm asking about you exactly. You're what are you, 19 or something?
Yeah,
Fresh out of
19.
basic training. You're getting buddies killed, and now you're supposed to like smoke and joke with the locals because that's what coin is.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that that's something that we should have done differently. If you're going to have a unit like ours come in specifically to do attack to clear missions, then we shouldn't be doing counterinsurgency, because the potential of issues like this, where now I just spent 2 weeks fighting with this neighborhood and these guys' cousins or uncles, or who, they might be related, they might not, whatever. But, I don't know any different. I just assume that maybe at this point you all know each other. And so that makes me kind of a little less willing to do those things.
Right.
And, at that point, we don't have like a public affairs guy attached to us. It's just us. So like we walk through, we talk to some people, we talk to elders, whatever it is, like pet your dog and stuff. Like honestly, like I really don't care what you think. It's kind of that attitude. So like I'm not going to do any good there.
Right.
But if you have a unit that's designated for that, then when we go through and we clear it, we secure it, whatever, then you can just take us out and you can bring in these people that are specialists in this. And I think closer to the end of the the war on terror, as far as Iraq goes, I think they started kind of realizing that and bringing in more of those, like the cultural affairs teams and the PIOs, and with the Lioness teams, where they had the female Marines actually able to go and talk with females in villages and stuff. So I think that did a lot better than having infantry guys come through, clear a town, and then go around and talk to people like it was no big deal.
Bureaucrats. I think that they need to follow up. You can't turn a hornet into a butterfly.
Yeah, well, and you can't, I guess you can't fault them, when you're looking at it in terms of like economy of resources. Hey, those guys are already there, let's just use them. But yeah, I don't think we were nearly as effective as we could have been.
I also fault, by the way, there's that mentality. I'm sure it's in Marine infantry. It's just as strong of like, yeah, I can do that. And so you've got military leaders saying, yeah, we can do that job. Yeah, we can deliver rice and mosque refurbishment kits, and we can also do massive clearance operations. We can do anything. We don't need State Department. We don't need these people. We can do it. And it's like, come on. That's not true either. Let's focus on what we're good at.
Yep. And then, when we ended the Steel Curtain portion in Ubaidi, and we went back to, so we'd go back to Al Asad Air Base, which was our main hub, right? That's where like my stuff was, right? All my stuff that I brought with me, extra clothes, all that stuff is like at Al Asad. That's where we could take showers, so at the end of each one of these portions, we'd go back there for a couple of days. I think after this, it was like a week. We got a week to sleep in the tent city and to eat at the chow hall and, to take showers and use the phone, whatever. And then we started the second portion of this operation that we were in, and that was the Iron Hammer one, where we got sent out to this like town in the middle of nowhere called Hit, which when you look at it on the map, it's kind of a big town. And one side of it is like a city, and the river runs right through it again. And the other side of it is kind of I don't know, I guess like a suburb where there's still a lot of houses, but they're more spread out. It's not nearly as congested. And there was this old school that actually, it was the worst. It actually shared a wall with a mosque. Like the courtyard wall shared a wall with the mosque.
Sure.
And still, it was an active mosque. And again, we had just spent like 3 weeks going through and fighting through this area. And now you stuck us next to a mosque where every day at the call to prayer is right inside of literally the speakers are right next to our, the building, the school that we had just fortified. And I mean, it was not the most fun portion of, being in Iraq. Like waking up for patrols and stuff is one thing, but getting woken up when you're not supposed to be on patrol and you got the call to prayer blaring because the speakers are 2 feet outside your window, like, yeah, that was a pain. So it was nice. We had this little outpost just down the road that was OP1, which was like on the very far edge of this little city. And that was the best place to go because it was just your platoon or just your squad or whatever. And like you were there and there was nothing around you for like a mile and a half.
Did you guys know you were coming home? Did you know the date you were coming home or on or about? So did you realize at this point in the hit that you were just a few weeks out?
So we did not. We actually knew kind of when we were supposed to be back, but we didn't, we weren't supposed to be back to the States until something like January something. So we still, by now it's November. So we still had almost 2 months or a month and a half before we would have been done with the deployment anyways. So I think a lot of us just assumed that we were going to be, in Iraq the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to get flown back or whatever. So we ended up just kind of going day by day, I guess. Like nobody really was like, oh, when are we going home? That'd be nice. We just assumed we were going to be there the whole stretch.
Right. Man.
I like it, man. Well, we've taken an hour and a half of your Sunday, and I know you got 2 little kids running around there. So I think we can probably halt it for now. This is one where we could talk we could go for 6 more hours too. That's the challenging part, right? This is like 1 year into your military career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rest of it was pretty uneventful. So,
well, there's not going to be a lot that compares to that. That was a pretty significant event there. Yeah.
Well, and you even like Sayre had said, the transition between jobs, right? Between what they require you to do in the military during that same period was kind of weird. That's why I started talking about HIT. When we went to HIT, the goal there wasn't attack to clear, right? The goal there was to specifically set up. So we wanted to stop. Obviously, there had been a bunch of IEDs and stuff and a bunch of attacks in the main portion of the town. So Echo and Golf ended up taking the city, mm-hmm. and we were on the other side of the river. Separated by the big long bridge across the way, but we were on the other side of the river, which had a school and a mosque, and it was kind of the suburbs. And the goal there was to set up a to set up a fob, to set up a secure presence, to do patrols, to do counterinsurgency, to the exact opposite of what we had just spent the last 3 or 4 weeks doing. And it was a very, I don't want to say it was a bad thing, because I think we did okay in HIT. I think we really did a good job at, we didn't have a ton of IEDs or attacks or anything like that. We did have some issues in some portions of the town, but for the most part, we went in there and just did patrols every day and didn't really have any issues. And it was it's just kind of a weird thing to explain, I guess, how okay it was, right? How easy it was for us to shift into that, knowing that what we just survived what we just went through, so it doesn't matter what happens now, we're going to do just fine, I think is kind of more of how we were looking at it. Not like, oh, this is great, man, I don't have to do anything but walk around all day and do these security patrols. It was like, hey, we've now shown that like we're capable of doing this thing that we just did. Now we really didn't have a care in the world.
Right.
Been through the gauntlet already.
Yeah. It was, I think the worst part about HIT was setting up the patrol base, because, it's the clay or stucco buildings or whatever. And we had to fortify the thing. So, I mean, we probably filled like 8,000 sandbags before they finally got some like combat engineers there to do the HESCO barriers.
Yeah.
So like we've just tons of sandbags in the windows, on the walls, all that stuff. And then they finally got those HESCO barriers around the outside of it. And yeah, that was probably the worst
First
part.
sergeant up the ass. That's right. First sergeant getting that shit done. Always improving the area.
Yep. Just filling sandbags for days.
I love hearing that. Yeah. Constantly improving. Improve sectors of fire, improve security positions. That's what it's about.
And it was, I mean, I don't know who picks the fobs for those kind of things, but it was such a weird place for us to be, because we have the school, and then there was a mosque right next door, a small mosque. And we actually had a really good line of sight into this courtyard, or like this marketplace area, and then the bridge that went all the way across the river to the Sharkey Mosque, which was this big popular mosque out there that had these giant, what do they call those, minarets or whatever they're called?
I think so. That sounds right. Yeah.
Whatever those are called. As far as I know, that mosque may no longer be there.
Yeah.
But
who knows? Well, maybe it's a mosque. It might be a better chance it's still around.
Yeah, but it was a good position to be in. But like, right next door was a mosque. Right across the street was a cemetery. So like at the time, when we first got to Iraq, like ROEs was like, you see guys digging on the side of the road, go ahead and do your thing. And like now you put our fob right next to a cemetery, there's gonna be people digging out there all the time. Like what, Yeah. So like, okay, well, if they're in this section, it's fine, but if they're here, it's not fine. So it's just kind of it was a weird place to put, the fob at, but I guess we really didn't have a choice because it was the only place big enough. It's
something weird like that.
Well,
logistics.
And then you're there to get the situational awareness to know that it is a graveyard, and that's why they're digging, rather than some other person not on the front lines who just sees a person digging on a screen and says bad guy, boom, because that's what the alternative is in a lot of ways, right? You are the eyes on the ground for everybody else, the tip of that spear,
Yeah. I mean, overall, like I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you guys have been asked, before too, but like I get asked all the time when guys bring up the military, or when people ask me about like the military, it's like, well, would you do it again? Probably. Yeah. I think for the most part it was good. Looking, but like obviously with the military, right? Especially my second deployment it was so much fun, like looking back at it, right? Because we were a boat company, so we were in the Zodiacs, we were doing stuff in the South Pacific, Australia and Korea, and like always on these boats, which was cool. But at the time, it was fun, but it sucked because we were always cold, because you're always wet. And then we went to like the Philippines, and we were like, I think we were the first unit, the first like infantry or first combat unit or something like that to go to Cambodia since the end of the Vietnam War, which was kind of a cool thing.
Sure.
Stuff like that is like cool to look back at, but like when you're doing it, it's like, this is just, it's boring, or it's miserable, or know.
Well, you said it right out the gate. Your comparison was before and after boot camp, and how different of a person you were. On the officer side, or at least at West Point, there's not like a very clear thing. We go through a basic training, but it's not the same. And so it's a longer period of time. But when I look back, when I was 18 to 23, 24, 25, that window, like a totally different person. And I think in a positive way, net positive. I'll say that. I'm on the same page, man. I would recommend it to people. I just think there's so many good things it can do for you. It can be a negative experience for a lot, but I agree. I'd recommend it.
The benefit, I believe, is it can help you gain perspective, right? And it's just by matter of being with a bunch of people not from your hometown. You don't have Aunt Linda yelling at you about going to church on Sunday or something. You just get out of in the environment, good, bad, or otherwise. You get out of it and get inserted into a brand new one with people of all colors, of all races, creeds, every single state, and you're collectively doing something, and you have to figure a way to get along. And you get along by learning what makes people tick, and you get along by learning what makes them get ticked off. And you only do that by getting your hands dirty with the people. And I think that to me is the main benefit, along with the hardship and what you learn as an individual, and the be all you can be, and you can be that person, and you can slay the fire dragon. It is possible, and you're with people, the good ones that foster that out, and they know that it's possible, and they bring that out of you. And to me, that's the beauty of the military.
I meant to mention this earlier, but we're going to get it in either way. I'm going to put your Instagram in the notes, Josh, because you did an awesome job documenting not just the pictures, but writing about the pictures as well. I think you said it was about a year ago. I did not do that. I wish I had taken more pictures and really put notes down to them and things like that. But anybody who's interested in the Marines, deployments, Iraq, any of that stuff, 100% worth checking out. It's some impressive stuff.
Yeah. I think I did. I don't know if I started in October I think I started it when we first got to Iraq all the way through Christmas. So like October to December, there's almost, it's not every day, but it's pretty close to almost every day that we were there, a photograph or something that kind of describes like the whole workup through the deployment, through the ambush, through Christmas, and then going home. So
it's like a form of a documentary. It's really cool.
Yeah.
All right, man.
I just want to say I flipped through them too, and I think it's great. It's awesome. These stories. Thanks for sharing the story so that we could, I just as an individual like hearing the story, right? These are things that you guys were doing. I was in college. Is it gonna run out? I don't know. The Saddam statue happened in 2003, like as a junior, and then this stuff's going hot and heavy. And by the way, meantime, I'm like, man, I'm also glad I'm not there. Right, because you're hearing about Anbar Province, and but then again, I'm also training to do it at the same time. So I feel like I was never there, definitely never in Iraq, but it's like those that vicarious stories, right? To live through them and just to talk about them and share them. And that's what makes all of the hardships, all those hard things, the suffering, to me, the relevant point is learning from it and knowing why these certain events happened, and the selflessness it's all about, at the end of the day, it's about doing something for somebody else. And like sharing those stories, I think is important because they just don't come out. You're not going to go around just talking about it. And I just think there's a big benefit to, these are just real life experiences, and a lot of them are they're very, we're so detached a lot of ways, especially with no draft and all of that. So these are all real events, very important events. I mean, just that single event, when you're talking about the guy that has a grenade thrown and he throws it back and he loses a hand in the middle of all of this, that was just like a little snippet out of a big story. I mean, that right there alone is just the wherewithal, the immediacy, the reaction to do something like the courage to do an act like that without even thinking. To me, that's what it's all about, are those sort of actions.
Yeah. Well, and then, not to get too far into it, but, some of the stuff that you guys just experienced with Afghanistan in August was a lot of that same stuff that a lot of guys that I served with dealt with when ISIS took over. I mean, literally places that we had just left, right? Places that we had come through, and to see it happen in Iraq, and then to see it again, like happen in Afghanistan, and there's guys like us sitting there like, what the. And there's nothing
we did our
do.
job. We thought,
exactly. And it's one of those things where like you look back at it and it's like, well, you did what you were supposed to do while you were there. There's not much you can do about it. But when you're talking about like interpreters and Iraqi army forces or Afghanistan, national defense and stuff, it's like, what can we do to help those guys out? And then to be able to come back and like be kind of pissed off at the government about the way that they handle some things or the way that they do some things, but still be able to come back and say, hey, yeah, sometimes it sucks, but you guys should, if this is something you're seriously thinking about, like the military is a good thing, you're going to learn from it. You're going to get something out of it. And a lot of it is, you get what you put in, you get out of it what you put into it. And I think for a lot of people, that's probably the right choice. The only the only advice that I would give people that are looking to get into the military is like, know the job that you want to do before you go.
Yes.
Because if you go no contract, you could be anything from a infantryman like I was, or you could be a cook. You know, it's like you want to go in knowing what you want to do, because
Yeah,
you want to be able
I
to bring
agree.
something out of it.
Or you
Yeah.
could get
And now
lucky
the
and become
Army,
an artilleryman.
yeah. And now the Army, I think, is even, you know, if you have skills or certifications or whatever, right? Like forklift or hazmat or that kind of thing, you can actually bring that out with you. Whereas when I was in, and I think the Marine Corps might still be this way, like you don't really bring any of that with you, right? It doesn't transfer back into the civilian world. So you'd have to do all that stuff over again. So if there's something like that, especially like IT is the big thing, cybersecurity is a big thing. Like you get all these
My brother,
certifications when you're
Air
done.
Force.
Yeah. And then when you're done, you've got essentially a pipeline right into a job.
It's called Skill Bridge. Like 6 months, he was an E5, 6 months. The last 6 months, he moved back to Ohio and wore civilian clothes. He had all the IT certs, which are all regular certs that are civilian ones, you know, so they all read it. It translates. There's always the technical aspect, but then no, there's a combat arms penalty, but you know, I agree with you. I still think it's worth it. It's just the experience. But it's not for everybody, to Josh's point. None of it is. Hey, Marines aren't for everybody. Maybe the Air Force is for somebody, right? I told my brother, don't go Army, don't go Marines, man. Don't do it. I recommend Navy or Air Force for you. I said Navy because they have cooler like beaches or whatever. You know, you're going to be at cool spots. He chose Air Force.
Yeah, you won't get stuck in Colorado.
Yeah, he got Montana, but it is what it is. You make it for what the experience is. But there is something for everybody, and it's always an option. And what a lot of people, I think, it's a lot of people choose to do it. You're talking about infantry and your high ASVAB score. It was making me think about, because you're associating dumb people with infantry, right? And I remember when I showed up at Ohio State, I didn't realize that, well, you don't get to pick your branch in Army ROTC. You have to rank it. That's how West Point is. And then OML determines what you get. And I just assumed going in that, you know, infantry would be easy to get because only dumb people go infantry. But that's what I wanted. That's all I wanted.
And I think that's the general conception, is like, you don't have to be smart to be a trigger puller and
knuckle dragger.
I will tell you,
it was not true though. Like it was very hard to get. Like you had to be top ranking to get it because all these shooters were going for it, you know, like hot shots. And it was very competitive.
I think that's how Marine Corps is too for like OCS is, you know, to get a slot as an infantry officer, you have to be, you know, close to, if not the top of your class, because there's a lot of those slots, but you have to be the best because they're relying on you to then run that rifle platoon, run that rifle company, you know, as you move up, like, you know, in order to be, I don't know if it's the same in every branch, but for a long time, so the Marine Corps, right, before Commandant Amos, we had never had an air op be a commandant. Never happened before. Because like it was always guys that had been infantry officers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's still it's either an official rule or it's unofficial rule where like you're not making sergeant major until you go to an infantry battalion. So like if you've been a radio or logistics or whatever, and you're a first sergeant and you want sergeant major, you got to go to an infantry battalion. And so you'll get, you get guys that come over to be first sergeants for these line battalions and have never done infantry before. And that's kind of the mark, is like, you have to be able to do this because now you're going to be one of the most highest ranking people in the Marine Corps. So you better know how to do everything, especially, and same thing with officers. Like if you're going to run an infantry battalion, which is the majority of the Marine Corps is infantry, right? That's the whole idea behind the Marine Corps, is that there's the infantry and then there's support for the infantry.
Right. Yeah,
so like those guys have to be the best that we can offer. And then if you look into, when you're looking at like battlefield history or you're looking at tactics and that kind of stuff, like you have to be smart. You have to be able to think about it. Because I've done the same thing. It's like, well, I don't really have to do anything to be infantry. As far as enlisting goes, I just have to show up. And then there's some guys that like they literally just showed up, but then there's a lot of not that I'm one of these guys, but there's a lot of guys that you run into in the infantry, especially, that are just so well spoken and, you know, super
Right.
intelligent guys. Like, you know, they're over here playing chess and we're still playing checkers, and all they're doing is they're just doing it because they like to do it.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
the
mean,
misnomer. I agree. That's the one thing that I think we all know what we're talking about, that nobody else truly gets that element of it, right? It's real hard to explain. There's a lot of cultural hurdles to get over, but like the weird, unique intelligence, at least that I found in the infantry, was very special. And just active duty in general, let's say. It's not even just infantry. Maybe it's all I know is infantry and then combat arms collectively, right?
right.
But that would be my take on it. Just that everyone's kind of, and it is true to be in 100 people, only one people are doing it. So you're gonna have to be a little bit of an oddball, I think, to do a job like that, especially time of war. You know, news isn't pretty when you were enlisting. So I think that's the camaraderie where we can have these conversations where we don't even know each other at all. Like I know that you and Preston met, but this is one of those things. Maybe I don't know if anybody knows that or not, but like, yeah, we just got on this call today, and that's it. And we just go at it and just start talking. And that's probably, I guess that's the vibe. That's what I'm feeling.
I like it.
Yeah, it's definitely different. Like going to and I don't know if you guys go to like the Legion or like the VFW or anything. Like I don't really frequent those very often, but you know, it's one of those things where, and I think that's a generational thing. Like for our generation, it's not really something that we do as much.
Right.
But it's definitely different. Like going to meet people for the first time or like talk to people for the first time in any other setting than it is like when it's other guys that have been in the military, or even like now, you know, with my current job, like even law enforcement. It's like, it's one of those things where there's some stuff that you just automatically have some kind of connection. It's super easy to talk about, and it's, you know, doesn't matter if I've ever actually met you in person or been in the same unit or anything like that. It's like there's something, because we both know there's something there that we both have the same kind of experience, or, you know, whatever it is.
Sure.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, thanks so much for taking the time, man. Thanks for
Of course.
all you've done and continuing to do with DNR, and hopefully we get a chance to talk again soon.
Yeah. Let me know, guys. Especially if you come back to visit family or whatever, let me know.
For sure.
Cool. Yeah.
All right, man.
Thanks, Josh.
We'll see ya.
All right, guys. See ya.